Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending and good morning. So my name is Luke Alston. I'm the Microsoft practice lead at CyberOne, and it'll be myself and Harry here taking you through our session around M365 licensing. So we'll run through the agenda in a second, but Harry, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Bytes as well?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Luke. Morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Harry Jameson, one of the Microsoft commercial specialists here at Bytes, work in a larger team of about 6 or 7 commercial specialists focusing on different areas, whether that's public sector, enterprise, mid-market, and corporate. And a bit about Bytes. We're one of the largest UK partners for CSP in Azure. So we cover some of the largest customers down to some of the smallest customers. So we can definitely help kind of tailor the needs of Microsoft licensing to you with the help of CyberOne and make sure that the requirement that you have is fit, and we can kind of build a solution around that and give you all of the tips and tricks around Microsoft licensing.
Perfect. Nice one. Yeah, so tips and tricks around licensing definitely needed. The Microsoft licensing is not easy. They don't make it easy for us, and that is, why we've put this session together. So, just in terms of an agenda, the usual stuff, quick intros, which we've said hello ourselves. I'll introduce some more details about the session in a moment, and from there we'll just get into, slowly over time, get into more deeper and more complex licensing topics. And then we'll round out at the end with some really interesting updates from Harry, who's going to give us a bit of an indication that actually there is quite a lot of price changing and things happening on the Microsoft end at the moment, and very much well worth staying tuned for that because there is actually, in some cases, an opportunity to pick up some discounted licensing. So, if that doesn't interest you, I'm not sure what will. So please stay tuned, and yeah, we'll crack on. So just in terms of CyberOne, I know there's a few friendly faces on the call, so I'll be brief on this point. But yeah, CyberOne, we're an MSSP. We've been operating now for 20 years or so. We're also founder operated, so we are essentially a private company. There's no shareholders telling us what to do. We do things that meet the needs of our customers, and that is our priority as a business. There's lots of other facts and interesting things on screen, but just in terms of the ones that matter most for this session, we are obviously a Microsoft partner. We have a number of the Microsoft designations as well, which essentially qualify us as experts in different Microsoft sort of technology areas. As I said, because we're an MSSP and obviously judging by our name, CyberOne, we are primarily a security vendor, security specialist organization, and that's most of the work that we do is security led and driven really. But we do have other specializations above and beyond that too. So, with that said, why Microsoft? So I'm sure we all are well aware who Microsoft are. They've been around for a fair while, and they have a technology pretty much in every feasible part of our businesses nowadays. But what I wanted to take us through is the concept of something called best of suite versus best of breed. So some of you may have heard of this comparison before. I won't do a full explanation of the pros and cons of each approach, but the idea is that when you're choosing technologies for your businesses, some organizations will go down the best of breed route, which typically means you'll choose an individual vendors per technology that are best in class for their particular area. So, for instance, you might choose an email security vendor for your email solution. You may then choose a endpoint security vendor for your endpoint solution, and those will be disparate technologies. They will be uh, have their own vendors. They'll be managed separately. They'll fundamentally be different under the hood as well, and that means that you can sometimes get best in class choices, but you have some complications in terms of managing all of these disparate technology options. The alternate approach is best of suite, which is what we would consider Microsoft. So best of suite, as you can probably imagine, it's the idea that we decide, we trust one particular vendor. We think they have a really strong offering, and so we'll invest our resources on and our wallets ultimately in that individual vendor, and we'll use the bulk of their technology to cover our estate really. So the idea is that the principle behind going with a best of suite approach and choosing someone like Microsoft as your primary vendor for technology is that it's often the most cost-effective approach because you're paying one organization for lots of different products. For that reason, it's also very simple, or at least simpler, we should say. And it's often better in the long term because that technology vendor will, of course, improve their products over time. Uh, some of the benefits that I think are well worth highlighting just on the right-hand side. So, in terms of the Microsoft ecosystem, all of Microsoft's technologies have native integration to one another. That makes compatibility and interoperability really, really easy. We then also have the advantages of single pane of glass, which means that particularly from a security standpoint, we have all of our security tooling presenting its output, the reporting, the dashboarding, the other information in a single pane of glass, a single view, if you like. It also makes conversation around total cost of ownership a bit easier, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail soon. And things like technical skills are more transferable across our, internal teams, or if we're outsourcing to someone like CyberOne, we also, it also enables us to have more transferable skills too. And then finally, if you engage with Microsoft and they're your primary choice, then you ultimately have one vendor to manage, one relationship or one primary relationship to manage. So just on the total cost of ownership point, I will say, and let's just be frank about this. I've put the sources down at the bottom of the slide here, and we will send out the material after the session as well. And this obviously will be recorded if you want to send it on to colleagues or watch it back yourself. But the three kind of points that we're seeing on screen here are, I've taken these from the Microsoft documentation, but Microsoft essentially used organizations like Forrester and other kind of market intelligence researchers to come up with some of these statistics. Um, so I'll leave you to decide, it's Microsoft funded research, I suppose, but I'll leave you to decide, the weighting you'll give to that. But I think it's interesting to understand that, particularly the green one on the right-hand side. So what Microsoft is saying here is that if you consolidate into Microsoft 365, so let's say historically you've got technology from 10 different vendors doing 10 different things. If you consolidate all of that into the Microsoft ecosystem, there's a potential there to actually save around 60% overall. Now, of course, that percentage is quite broad, right? Per organization, it will be substantially different, I imagine. But it's a good indication of why going for a best of suite vendor like Microsoft can be advantageous just from a financial perspective alone. Now, we did mention as well market intelligence, so I'll just flash these up on screen. So Microsoft products have been a leader in various different categories for many years now. Probably all aware of Gartner, perhaps Forrester and IDC as well. Again, sources are down at the bottom of the page. So I just wanted to run through some things there to quickly set the scene, and now we'll get into the nitty-gritty and the main topic of today. So Microsoft licensing itself, in terms of the basics that we need to understand, and I am distilling this down to some very simple language here, but let's start at the basics and build our way up. So in terms of Microsoft 365, it is licensed on what's called a USL, or user subscription license, and the idea is that each individual user that may access a Microsoft service or product should be assigned a USL or a license. That seems fairly explanatory. And what's also worth understanding is that some of the Microsoft services and products have a P1 and P2 variant. The P just stands for plan. And the idea is that the lower level license gives you the P1 capability, and the uplifted license gives you both the P1 and P2 capability. So just as a way of an example, if we imagine an organization with 500 users, they would need to have 500 appropriate licenses for the Microsoft services that they wish to use. So if we take Microsoft Defender for Endpoint P2 as an example, all 500 users in that organization would require a license such as M365 E5. Now, there is an alternative option, which is that in this particular example, that organization could go for an M365 E3 license, but then choose to have the E5 security add-on. That in itself is quite a common approach, and it's something I'll touch on a bit later. But this is just an example. There is other methods that you could use to kind of be efficient with your licensing. But again, for now, let's try and keep things fairly straightforward. So I'm a big fan of trying to visualize things. For me, that really works well. So I'm hoping that it works for you guys as well. What I'm going to show here is just a very basic diagram that I've put together. Now, I want to highlight that this is simplified and it is also high level. So this diagram does not give you the full nitty-gritty details of the Microsoft licensing, but it will frame our conversation for today. So if we think about the different licensing options available, at the top level there, we've got information worker plans. The first one of those I'm going to talk us through is Microsoft 365 for Business. And within there, I've highlighted that there's two main tranches of licensing. Now, there's actually more than two, but again, simplification. We've got Business Standard and Business Premium. And then within each of those individual licensing SKUs, they give you access to different amounts of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So you can see for the M365 Business Standard variant, you pretty much just get Office 365. It's a lightweight license. It's very cheap, relatively speaking, and it gives you kind of the basics to have a set of collaboration and productivity tools in Office 365. But if you want to invest in security tooling, you would need to then choose the Business Premium, which is a more expensive uplift to the business level licensing. That would give you everything in Business Standard, but it would also give you a Windows license. It would also give you access to something called EMS, which is the Enterprise and Mobility Suite. And within there is various products that we'll learn about shortly. As a comparison, then, we have Microsoft 365 for Enterprise or M365. And within there, we have our E3 and E5 licenses. And again, within those, we have a subset of things that you gain access to. Now, again, because this is a simplified diagram, E3 and E5 look identical here, but the reality is if we are to break down and do a deeper dive into those dashed boxes, you actually get a different set of technology depending on whether you go for E3 or E5. And as we go through today's session, we will be lasering in on these lower level areas in the dashed boxes. And then finally, just in terms of the broad Microsoft 365 licensing types, there's also a frontline workers plan. And within there, we've got F1, F3, and F5. And again, the same principle. They give you different levels of access to different technology. So, like I said, this is a simplified way to think of the Microsoft licensing. Obviously, today's session is focused on M365, and there is nuances and complications in all of this. But just as a way to simply understand the main tranches, though what we've got on screen here is really the way to go. So business, we've got M365 Business, M365 Enterprise, and M365 Frontline. Feel free to take screenshots, by the way, as we go through this. I will, we will share material, but sometimes it's helpful just to grab your own as well. Okay, so I'm going to jump into M365 for Business now, and the idea here is we'll talk through the different tranches. Now, again, simplification. I've put together this tabular view, which for me works well. It's quite visual, but I just want to talk us through some really key bits to understand about the business level licensing. So right at the top there, what I've written is that this license is intended for small to medium businesses. And in terms of Microsoft's licensing definition, that is up to 300 users. So if your organization is 300 licensed users or less, then you qualify and are able to purchase the business level licensing. Now let's talk through some of the details in there. In fact, before we do that, you can see in the orange part of the table, the top header of the table, there's four main types of business licensing, and beneath that I've put the list prices. The list prices with an individual asterisk, those are prices that may be coming in next month, or I believe we can more or less confirm they are coming in next month. But Microsoft may change something last minute. And that's because there is actually a price harmonization happening. Now, Harry's going to touch on that a bit later, so I won't go into it now. But those prices are list prices, and that means they may be different than what you're paying at the moment. So if these are looking cheaper or, just different than what you're paying, this is where you can engage with CyberOne and Bytes, and together we will help you, essentially get, a more affordable license or a more efficient licensing setup with Microsoft. So in terms of what you actually gain from these four different types of business level licensing, in the basic element, you basically, in short, you get the collaboration tools. So things on screen here, I imagine, if you speak to someone in the street, when they think of Microsoft, they probably think of things like Word or Excel or PowerPoint. So these just give you the basic level collaboration and productivity tools, and that's it. It is just the very lowest level of licensing, really, that is appropriate for a business. If we then look at the next column along, this one is slightly unusual. So M365 apps for business. Now, the distinction between the second column and the first column is that actually you can see you don't get Teams, you don't get SharePoint, you don't get Exchange. Instead, you get the desktop versions of Excel, Word, Outlook, and PowerPoint. This is, to me, a slightly unusual choice. I don't see many businesses go for this, but the principle for this second column is if your organization requires or prefers to use the actual thick client applications installed directly on your device, then that option will be provided to you. Whereas for the business basic level, you only get the cloud versions of those products, which would mean if you want to access Word with Business Basic, you need to do it through your browser, which some people may not find as user friendly. Now, what I would say is most of you on the call, and I am making an assumption here, probably have either the business standard, which is what I've just brought up here, or business premium. Now, in terms of business standard, you don't just get Clipchamp and Loop. Those are the additional features that you get. So with business standard, you get everything in column one and everything in column two, plus the two additional pieces in column three. So business standard, again, it's a pretty good price. It's giving you the all of the productivity and collaboration apps within the business level licensing package. It's allowing you to access them through your browser or through the application installed locally on your devices. It also is giving you Teams, and then you get Loop and Clipchamp in addition to that. Now, there's probably a number of you using that level license at the moment. Now, what I would strongly consider is actually looking at upgrading to Business Premium. And the reason for that is that with Business Premium, again, you have everything in the previous columns, but in addition, you get a handful of the security and compliance technologies. Now, these are business, the kind of business variants of those. So for Entra ID and for Intune, and also for Office 365, we got the P1 variant. We get the Plan 1 variation of that. Now, we also get Defender for Endpoint, but in this case, it's renamed and is slightly modified to be Defender for Business. But in essence, in that right-hand column, you get an identity product in Entra. You get an endpoint security tool in Defender for Business. You get an email security tool in Defender for Office 365. You get a device management tool in Intune. You get an information protection tool in Purview, and you also get a Windows Pro license as well. So this business premium tranche, if you like, is giving you all of the collaboration and productivity tools, but it's giving you the ability to better secure your organization. So this is, in my view, for what you're actually paying for this license, you do actually get quite a lot. And this will become apparent when we compare it to the enterprise level licensing shortly. But again, to qualify for anything that I've talked about so far, your business needs to have a maximum of 300 licensed users or less. If you go over that 300, well, we'll come on to that shortly, but you essentially have to move to the enterprise level licensing. So again, take a screenshot if you like. This is just another visualization, another way to try and break down what you actually gain within the business level licensing. Like I said, because I'm a fan of visualization, I've also made a different view again to give an even higher level picture. So the way to think about it is that for the business level licensing, these are the different technologies that are included. Now you'll notice that Defender for Identity and Defender for Cloud Apps are grayed out, and that's because they do not exist in the business level licensing. The other options you do have, but those two are completely removed from that licensing essentially. You can see here we've got Office 365 in purple, we've got Enterprise Mobility and Security in green, and then Windows in yellow. So if we remember that first diagram I showed you, these are those three categories that were in those dashed boxes, but a slightly different view of those. So again, just a different way of visualizing what we may get within the business premium level license. So what we're seeing here is the top level business license, which is business premium. Okay, so I will move on to M365 for Enterprise. And I should say, any questions or comments or anything, please put them in the chat. We've got a team monitoring that and we'll come back to those at the end of the session if there's time. So moving on, M365 for Enterprise. So this license level is intended then for organizations over 300 users. Now, the way that this works is that that 300 user mark is really what determines can you get the cheaper business level licensing or do you have to pay for the larger enterprise level licensing? That's just the point that, the line in the sand that Microsoft have chosen. Under 300, you get the business level. Over 300, you need to get the enterprise level. Now, what you should notice immediately is that for the M365 E3, you get much more tooling. Pretty much everything that I've brought up here is productivity and collaboration, with the exception being some of the Power sort of Automate and Power Apps stuff and with the Windows Enterprise license. But the rest of it is, productivity, collaboration tools. So great, we get more of that stuff. Sure, why not? That's nice. But from my perspective, from the perspective of securing and better managing your organization, what I'm particularly interested in is the things in orange here. So again, because this is the lower end of the enterprise level license, M365 E3, we're limited to the P1 capabilities. Now, what you'll notice is the things in the dashed box, those P1 capabilities, those are effectively identical to the business level licensing. So if you were to choose business premium, you are sort of getting a similar offering to M365 E3. Okay, you lose some of those productivity and collaboration tools, but in terms of Entra, Intune, some of the Defender technologies and Purview, you're actually getting a similar offering, which is great. That is fantastic news for organizations that are 300, licensed users or less, because Microsoft are not penalizing you for being a smaller business. In a way, you're kind of getting a discounted bundle, but the core important technologies are still there for you. So you will notice, of course, that the M365 E3 license is giving you an awful lot. So what do we actually get if we choose to uplift to the full fat M365 E5 license? So you'll probably notice the prices there. Again, these are the prices based on the likely prices that will happen in February. So we've got £29 per user per month for E3, and then let's call it £47 per user per month for E5. So that's quite expensive, right? I mean, getting on for £50 per user per month is not cheap by any means. So what do we actually get within that package? So what we get is essentially a upgrade and some additional technologies for all of our security and compliance tools. So for Entra, for Intune, for the various Defender technologies, we get the P2 uplift, which means we're now accessing the complete feature set of those products. We also gain access to Defender for Identity and Defender for Cloud Apps, which up until this point we have not had. So those are new products that are added in at the E5 level. We also get Power BI Pro if that's something of interest to you. Now, what I will highlight here is the uplift, in terms of the price uplift between an E3 and an E5, because it is quite a big jump. What some organizations will do is kind of take a middle ground approach, and instead they will purchase E3 licenses, and then they will purchase an add-on license for either the security products or the compliance products. I'll talk about that in more detail shortly. But that's an approach that would enable you to gain access to the E5 level technologies, but at a cheaper cost by using add-on licenses. It would mean that you would lose Power BI. But in terms of securing your environment, that's perhaps not so important. So again, just to give us a different visualization, a different way to think about it, I'll bring back this diagram. Now, this time around, the Defender for Identity and Defender for Cloud Apps there at the top are highlighted. So those are possible to, achieve within the enterprise level licensing. The asterisk there is because within E3 you can't get those. You can only get them with either the full E5 license or the E5 security add-on. You'll also notice that in the yellow section, it's instead of a Windows Professional license, it's a Windows Enterprise license. And that Purview now spans those three boxes, whereas previously it only covered the first two boxes. And that's because we gain the uplift to Purview as well. So if you were to go ahead with an M365 E3 or E5 purchase, you get a fuller set of technology, a fuller set of capabilities. Something probably worth pointing out is that if you are a business with less than 300 users, you can still purchase the enterprise level licensing if you want. Microsoft are not going to prevent you paying for the more expensive license. Some organizations do choose to do that. Within CyberOne, we've got a fair range of customers. Quite a number of our customers are, wealth management companies. They kind of have work in the financial sector. And therefore, security compliance is top of their agenda, really. And those organizations, they may have, say, 30 users, but they may choose to actually go ahead and buy one of the enterprise level licenses because they want the full access to the entire feature set. So although they're eligible for business level licensing, they actually choose to go to the more expensive version to get that full, a plethora of options. So that is a possibility for you. It's relatively common for organizations with a decent security budget to go down that route. So again, what we're seeing here is the options around E3 and E5 licensing. So I've mentioned add-ons briefly here. What I wanted to bring up is actually the different add-ons available, and I appreciate, the conversation quickly becomes complex here. So with the enterprise level licensing, so M365 E3 and M365 E5, we no longer get Teams included. Now that change has been out for quite a while. Most of you are probably aware of that. So Teams Enterprise is now there's a separate cost to that, so £4.30 based on January list price. So Teams is a separate add-on for enterprise level, but for business level, it's actually included. So again, if you are a smaller business, you're actually getting a pretty good deal in my opinion. In terms of some other add-on options available to you, so we've got M365 Copilot. I'm sure we're all well aware of what Copilot is. It's not cheap, and there are actually some changes coming to Copilot, again, that Harry will touch on shortly. We then also have Priva. So Priva is a data sort of a data privacy management tool. It's different than Purview. Purview is around data security. Priva is around data privacy. And yes, I appreciate those two things are very similar, but it is a separate product and does have an add-on charge. We then got Windows 365. So, this Windows 365 is the idea that we're having cloud-based computers. It's, in old language, it would be almost like having virtual machines, but they're cloud hosted and allow you to, access devices and perhaps even share virtual devices among colleagues. Now, for most organizations, this is quite an expensive proposition, but I just wanted to raise the fact that it does exist. It's something in my experience that organizations like banks tend to use. That's where I've seen it most commonly. But of course, they're organizations with tens of thousands of users. Viva. So Viva is around employee engagement. So Viva is actually a suite of tools, and you can buy individual Viva products. But what I've just put on there is the price for the actual entire Viva suite. Next one is then Defender Vulnerability Management. So this is an uplift to Defender for Endpoint. Now, Defender for Endpoint already includes a vulnerability management core capability. But what you can do is choose to uplift to the full vulnerability management add-on. And there's two different prices there. If you have the Defender for Endpoint P2 product already, then you would pay £1.64 approximately on list price. If you had Defender for Endpoint P1, or in fact, I think even if you have a lower level than that, perhaps even the business option, you could upgrade to for £2.50 to get the full vulnerability management capabilities. So those six that I've gone through so far are sort of distinct add-ons that are quite different than, the out-of-the-box M365 E3 or E5. The options on the right-hand side, I mentioned earlier that because of the price uplift between an E3 and an E5, some organizations will choose to go for a kind of middle ground approach. And that's where what you may do is invest in M365 E3 licenses for all your users, and then choose either or perhaps both of the security and compliance add-ons. So if we were to then go for E3 plus the E5 security add-on, that gives you all of the P2 capabilities for the security tools. So things like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office 365. You would also get Defender for Identity and Defender for Cloud Apps in there. And that, I believe, approximately is about £12 per user per month. If you wanted to enhance the Purview capabilities, then you would choose the E5 compliance option. And there is actually a combined ability, so you can choose essentially both of those add-ons together. And I believe the overall cost will be cheaper, but I couldn't find a published list price for that one. So I've just put question marks, to be honest. But the idea again is if you don't need every single thing that you get in E5, you could choose E3, then apply some add-ons to E3, and it will get you, sort of 80% of the way to an E5, but at a potentially cheaper price. And I should say that, because all of the numbers that I'm presenting here are list prices, you may be thinking, oh, that's a bit more expensive than, what I currently pay, or that's more expensive than, quotes I've had. And that's because, if you buy the list price, you typically end up paying more. So like I said earlier, if any of this licensing stuff requires a further conversation with you, reach out to myself, one of the CyberOne team, reach out to Harry, and together we can help you, kind of understand this and maybe get you a better deal if all things work out. Okay, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour on add-ons. Add-ons do complicate the conversation, but it is well worth understanding. And, someone like Harry will be able to give bespoke advice on a per customer basis if those conversations are needed. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to raise is there's actually a Sentinel benefit that is slightly hidden within the E5 licensing. This also gives me the opportunity just to kind of nod to the other variants of E5 licensing. So you can see across the top there, I've mentioned M365 E5. There's also something called A5, which is actually an educational license. Now, educational licenses, they might be used by universities, for example, or schools. The idea is that because those organizations have students, those students need the productivity and collaboration tools, and it's great to secure their accounts, but they aren't really an employee. They're different than an office worker. They're something else. and therefore Microsoft prices the educational licenses differently, and in fact cheaper than the comparable sort of typical enterprise level license. So A5 is educational. I suspect if that you are a business with an educational need, you should be aware of that. If not, then we can help on that conversation. F5, which I'll come on to shortly, we've not yet covered the frontline licenses. And then G5 is government. Um, that is predominantly an option available in the United States, but I just wanted to make you aware that it exists. Anyway, to focus on the topic of this slide, so the Microsoft Sentinel benefit. Ultimately, if you have the full E5 capability, then you gain access to a data grant of 5 megabytes per user per day for ingestion of M365 data into Sentinel. There's four main data sources available that count towards that grant, that 5 megabyte grant, which are Entra ID, Defender for Cloud Apps, Purview, and M365. Now, the logs that will contribute or count against that grant, that kind of free of charge 5 megabytes, it's not every single log from all four of those products, but it is the major logs from those products. So it will make your Sentinel, if you do have a Sentinel SIEM tool in place, it will make your ingestion charges, potentially quite cheap. We CyberOne do have an MDR service which uses Microsoft Sentinel as the SIEM and SOAR platform. Some of our customers who are smaller businesses, like the 30 user business example that I gave earlier that do have an E5, because they're a small business, they of course generate fewer logs. And because they have the Sentinel benefit, this data grant with their E5 licensing, their data ingestion cost into Sentinel is ridiculously cheap because some of these companies are a Microsoft house. They only really have Microsoft technology, and it means that an awful lot of the data that we monitor for them within Sentinel is ultimately free as part of this grant. So there is an interesting efficiency there if you're a small business again. Now, in addition to those four data sources, which are ultimately, given a data grant up to 5 megabytes, you do get some further data sources that are totally free. So those are the Azure Activity Log, you get the Office 365 Audit Log, and also alerts from the Defender products. That final one is really, really important because if you have heavily invested in Microsoft security tools, an awful lot of telemetry that's generated will come from the Defender technologies, and the fact that the alerts for those are completely free and there's no data cap on that at all, they're just free carte blanche. That's really quite good. So that, if you do choose to invest in a full M365 E5 license, you've got let's call it a cheaper way to, implement a Sentinel-based SOC. Now, Microsoft on their website do have this quote. You save about $2,200 per month based on a 3,500 seat deployment. Again, this is a Microsoft quote. I've got the reference down in the slide there. Up to you how much you read into that. Okay, so next is M365 for frontline workers. So I'm going to try and rattle through this one now. So in terms of productivity and collaboration, you get various tools here on the left-hand side. You'll notice there is an F1, F3, and F5 license. Now, the interesting thing here is that F5 is actually an add-on. So in order to purchase an F5 license, you have to either have the F1 or F3 in addition. Now, I couldn't find a list price for F5, but you can see the list prices for F1 and F3 there. Now, the idea behind the frontline license is that these are non-office workers. So an easy example that we can all understand is, imagine you are a healthcare company and you employ carers. Those carers go to people's homes and they look after the elderly, or other people in need. Those individuals, they don't work in an office, so they don't necessarily need a laptop, and they certainly won't sit at a desk. So what you can get with an F level license is you can basically give those people who, work on the go a significantly cheaper license, but still give them access to the main productivity tools. Now you'll notice that in the F1 column, you still gain Entra and Intune, which is quite interesting because now you're able to manage their identity and manage their device. Now, their device in this case is probably a mobile phone or a tablet, so they may not be a user of a desktop or laptop, but Intune still provides value, and Entra obviously allows you to manage their actual identity. Um, in the F3 level, now you do actually then get a Windows license, which again is interesting to me because these are for non-office workers, but we're actually giving you a device level license here for Windows Enterprise, again for pretty low price. If you then choose for the F5 security and or compliance add-on, you get a subset of the P2 capabilities. So you get Defender for endpoint and Defender for Office. You also get Entra and Purview. So you miss out on things like Defender for Cloud Apps and Defender for Identity, but you're getting, again, a good value package for those frontline workers that are non-office based workers, typically working, on the go using a mobile phone. Perhaps they need email access. They need to access things like their pay slips and some of the basic information, and that's probably about it. It's a really good option for those type of workers. Okay, so you've probably heard enough from me, and hopefully that was, a good starter in terms of an intro to some of the Microsoft licensing. I'm going to hand over to Harry now, who's going to take you through some Microsoft related updates. Um, and then we'll come back to me to wrap up the session.
Perfect. Thanks, Luke. Yeah, so I'll just go through kind of some of the major updates that have been coming out of Microsoft and kind of into the partner community as well as kind of trickling down into customers and kind of clarify some of what these actually mean versus kind of what people have been posting on LinkedIn, and then kind of giving you the information to go to into your business and make some decisions. So there's a lot of talk just before Christmas about Microsoft cancelling EAs, and a lot of people saying that there's never going to be any more EAs and it's all going to be CSP going forward. That isn't quite true, but it is certainly a step in that direction. So essentially, what's going to happen as of the 1st of April is Microsoft will be much more strict on whether a customer can renew an EA or not. So they'll be much more heavily focused on looking at putting a customer into a CSP agreement and working closely with a partner to kind of tailor that solution to a particular customer's requirement. So EA will be much more focused on larger enterprise customers, so even higher potentially than 2,400, and for specific requirements where there needs to be amendments to the contract terms. So things like payment terms or some of the amendments that we see for very specific customers, and that will get approval from high up within Microsoft. So that actually allows Microsoft to take slightly more control. So that is a very good thing because CSP means you work a lot closer with a partner and you get a lot more control than you would with Microsoft. They kind of quite often will set up the EA and then just leave it to run its course. Whereas with the CSP, the partner typically is a lot more involved, and we can make sure that you're actually using the licenses that you require. CSP will be having some updates as well in terms of what the product terms look like. So that should help as well in terms of comparing that to EA over the, typically at the moment it's a 1 to 3 year comparison. So that should help as well. Next slide, please, Luke. So another update that Microsoft have announced is they're going to be having Copilot available to pay monthly. So instead of at the moment, Copilot is you're forced to pay those licenses up front. So you have an annual commitment for 1 year from the date of your purchase, and then you have to pay that up front as well. So it can be quite tricky for some smaller organizations to have that uptake into AI, because actually that upfront cash flow might not be there straight away. So as of the 1st of December last year, they released a monthly billing option. So that allows you to still have the annual commitment for the Copilot. So that locks in the pricing and the amount of licenses that you want to commit for. But it means you're actually able to bill those monthly, which is slightly more beneficial for some smaller organizations and organizations that are a bit more focused on cash flow. So that is a good thing. The only slight downside is that it does have an incur charge of an additional 5% to your bill, so it's slightly more expensive than paying up front. But we are seeing customers take advantage of that because it does allow them to spread those costs. And of course, you could also take both. So if you wanted to have 5 that you pay annually for, and then 25 that you pay monthly for, again, that is something that is possible. So it's definitely something that can help customers take AI and kind of use those Copilot licenses. So yeah, really positive there. Perfect, thanks, Luke. So similar into that vein, Microsoft are going to be releasing this model for all licenses as of the 1st of April. So that will mean any renewals before the 1st of April or any net new purchases. That won't affect you until that license comes up for renewal next year if it's an annual commitment, because Microsoft guarantee that price for 1 year, so they can't adjust that midterm. But any licenses that are purchased as a net new purchase after the 1st of April, or any renewals that fall outside of that as well. So anything after the 1st of April for a renewal would have the changes that we're going to go through now. So what it's going to look like is, if it's an annual commitment but you pay up front, that is your list price and you would get the price that is agreed. If you have an annual commitment but you pay monthly, that incurs a 5% increase in cost from Microsoft that is then obviously added onto your bill. So Microsoft is clearly trying to incentivize annual payments. And then as it is already, if you do a monthly commitment and monthly build, it's 20% more expensive. So that isn't changing. So all that's changing is that middle column in this window here. So it's going to become slightly more expensive. But if most CSP renewals we find are in February, so actually this shouldn't affect most customers until next year. If you do have any concerns about this, or if there's anything you want to see if you can do to mitigate this, then please speak to Luke and myself, or put some questions in the chat, and we could potentially kind of answer them offline and get in touch with you and see what we can do to support. There is quite a few different tricks that we have with customers, so we're more than happy to try and review how we can cut that cost down for another year if your licensing falls, for example, on the 2nd of April this year. Next slide, please, Luke. Thank you. So, Luke went through all of the really good benefits of kind of E3 versus E5 and business premium versus E3. So this is something that potentially might help your business see the value of E5 while reducing that cost for the first year. So Microsoft have got a promo on at the moment. So for net new customers to E5, you will be eligible for a 15% discount on that license. So it's quite significant, and that 15% will remain for the whole year of your contract. So this will allow you to kind of slowly scale up those services and products that are included in E5. And then by the time you get to the renewal next year, when you'll go back to list price, in theory, you should have everything deployed, and then you should be seeing the value that E5 offers versus taking all of those different vendors that Luke touched on at the start. So it's a really good offer. It does reduce the price quite significantly, and it means that you have time to deploy those services while you're not paying full price. There are exceptions that we can put in if you've already got a couple of licenses, but you don't typically use it. You might have just bought 1 or 2 to test in the past, or for an admin, for example. So if this is of interest, or you want to understand if you can get an exception, please reach out to Luke and myself, or drop a question in the chat again, and we can hopefully walk you through that process. So that's really positive and something that we should take advantage of. So on kind of, this goes back to the first slide that we were talking about how we can compete against enterprise agreements now, and how it's a good offer to get on CSP, because CSP has that flexibility. You work closer with a partner, and you kind of have that pre-built relationship. So Microsoft have announced that 3-year subscriptions will be coming for M365 E3 and M365 E5, potentially as of the 1st of April, kind of as early as that, but it might leak out into kind of June, which is Microsoft's financial end of year. So it might kind of go just to the 1st of June potentially, but definitely something that will be coming soon, and something that will be really positive for customers that are heavily focused on CSP and they want that commitment availability within their price. So that means if you buy a license today, let's say the 3-year SKUs were already available. If you were to buy that license today, that pricing would be guaranteed for 3 years. So it means that your business can be really certain of what that price is going to be over the next 3 years. The only downside would be that any licenses on that commitment would be locked in for 3 years. So what we're kind of estimating is not customers won't put all of their licenses on a 3-year commitment because it's just too risky, but potentially there could be a mix and match of 3-year, 1 year, and monthly, depending on what your business looks like. But for some businesses, this will be really positive and it will allow you to have more control over your licensing and over the pricing as well, because we know Microsoft pricing fluctuates so much year on year and potentially even more than that within the year. So this is a good way of guaranteeing that pricing once it comes available. Perfect. So there's as ever with Microsoft, there's some price rises that have been announced. So they're going to be increasing a couple of products, and Teams Phone is one of them. So this is any Teams Phone license. So this is the Teams Phone Standard, which is the dial pad license that you would need to buy if you're using telephony within Teams. And then if you're actually using Teams calling capabilities as well, so not a third-party vendor, they're also going up in price as of the 1st of April. So if you've got the renewal before that, your pricing will be guaranteed and locked in. If your renewal is after that, or you're looking at purchasing it, then you would have that higher price. You can buy one license before, so at the end of March, and that would lock your price in for 1 year if you've got kind of something going on at the moment and you want to make sure that pricing is guaranteed. So yeah, definitely quite significant increases there for some of those licenses. So it would be worth reviewing that. The reason that they've done this, we think, is because this product is included in M365 E5, so they're trying to make it more appealing to move to E5 because the price of that doesn't change; it's actually come down, whereas the price of this product standalone is more expensive. So it makes more sense to move to E5. Next slide, please, Luke. So in that similar vein, Power BI Pro and Premium are also going up in price. So same with the previous slide. If the renewal is after the 1st of April, then you'll have the incurred charge of the new price. If your renewal or net new purchase is before the 1st of April, your pricing would be guaranteed for 1 year. This product is also included in M365 E5 and doesn't affect the price of that. So again, it's trying to reduce the gap for customers to move to E5, which is what Microsoft like to sell. So you can see why they've done it. So definitely want to be aware of some quite significant price increases there of about $4 per user per month, so quite high percentages. So definitely want to try and avoid or buy the licenses beforehand if you're looking at deploying a solution for that. So we've put together just kind of a little Microsoft timeline just to kind of summarize everything that we've kind of gone through. So as of the 1st of January, so just kind of looking back a little bit, the 15% promo on M365 E3 and E5 was launched. So again, trying to incentivize net new customers to take up those solutions, have that discounted price for 1 year to allow your IT teams to roll out those solutions and potentially have any contracts with other third-party vendors come to an end, and then everything can roll into that one E3 or E5 license. As of as of Saturday, there'll be new pricing for the customers buying in Great British pounds. So that will be a 5 to 6% reduction on any online services at the point of renewal, or if new purchases are taken on the 1st of February. Microsoft review currency pricing twice a year, and they've announced that the Great British Pound licenses will be reduced. So any licenses purchased in that currency that are an online service, because they've said that it's stronger compared to the dollar, so the price needs to come down to make that fairer. So this kind of February, March time, just before April, is quite this kind of a sweet spot for licensing renewals that we feel between the knowledge that CyberOne and Bytes have together, because a lot of the changes that Microsoft announced typically come in as of around the end of March, April time. So if your renewal is in February, you quite often can alleviate that for an additional year, and it gives you time to put your budgets in place, kind of create a plan with your partner, and then make sure that everything's in line so you know what's going to happen as of the 1st of April. And then, as we've just touched on the previous slides, the price increases for the the licensing model, so monthly and annual, is going to happen. Power BI and Teams Phone is going to increase at the 1st of April, and then potentially the release of 3-year SKUs as well. So there's quite a lot happening. There's a lot going on in the Microsoft world at the moment. So hopefully that gives you a kind of a clearer picture of the timeline. And then this is basically just a summary of everything that we've gone through. So the transition from EA to kind of Microsoft Direct and CSP. And again, we touched on kind of how important it is to get a strong CSP partner, one that's aware of all the changes and one that has a strong team, not only of pre-sales consultants, but as well as licensing consultants as well. The monthly build option available for Copilot now with the 5% increase on cost and the 15% discount for net new seats of E3 and E5 for customers. So appreciate that was quite a lot of information quite quickly, but hopefully that gives you a bit more understanding of the licensing and the background and what's coming up with Microsoft.
Brilliant. Thank you, Harry. So just to wrap up the session, I just wanted to quickly talk us through 3 different Microsoft-funded engagements. So these are engagements that Microsoft has a tactical kind of approach to, where they will essentially make sure that to you, the end customer, there is no charge. So CyberOne are qualified to deliver these different engagements, and like I said, there's no cost to you. Microsoft funds them. It's a win-win-win for all parties involved, really. Very briefly, we have the threat protection engagement. This, you can see some of the technologies that I've just put down there in yellow. The idea is that if you have one or more of those technologies, perhaps you've got the license for it, but you haven't fully implemented the technology, or maybe you've started the implementation, but you just want to assess where you've got to. Maybe you've even finished the implementation and you're thinking, well, did we do the best job we could have? Maybe some kind of review or assessment of what we've done so far would be helpful. These are the kind of things that we can deliver for free, essentially, as part of a threat protection engagement. So if you've got one of those technologies in place or you're thinking about them, we can help you out with that. And obviously there will be no charge. The idea is, maybe we could do a proof of concept or a review or assessment or something along those lines. In the middle then, data security, similar kind of concept. This is focused on Microsoft Purview in particular. So this time I've listed some of the in-scope activities that we can cover. So we can do things like data discovery to understand what data your organization actually has, which, that in itself can be quite tricky. We can then do things like identify sensitive or stale data. We can then protect or help protect against data loss, data breaches. And we can do that through the implementation of DLP policies, through classification and labeling. We can even do bits and pieces on insider risk management as well. So the threat protection and data security engagements are really great options. What I will say is that there is particular qualifying criteria. This is not something that we control. It's something that Microsoft requires. What I would suggest is that if either of those are interesting to you, please reach out to us, reach out to anyone at CyberOne, and we'll have a conversation with you to understand if you are able to qualify for these offerings. If you are, then we'll be more than happy to deliver them for you. Now, the one on the right-hand side, the Copilot readiness assessment, this one, the qualifying criteria is very, very broad, and it's highly likely that all of you will qualify for this option. Again, it's Microsoft funded. There's no charge to you. CyberOne will run the assessment for you. Essentially, all we need from you for this one is approval. We just need verbal approval that you're happy for us to engage and start performing the assessment on your behalf. And it will assess a number of things that I've put in the outcomes down there. The idea is you actually get an output report with some recommendations in terms of how you could better prepare yourself for something like a Copilot. Generally, it's very data orientated. So, if you're an organization who actually you're thinking that data security one in the middle might be an option, but perhaps you don't meet the qualifying criteria, you could go for the Copilot readiness assessment, and you're kind of getting a lightweight bit of review or assessment over your data security practices. So, like I said, these are funded engagements. There's no charge for you. If you qualify, CyberOne can run these for you. So please reach out if anything there is of interest. And just the final thing before I wrap up, I just wanted to bring up on screen some of our different professional and managed services, some of the Microsoft technologies that we specialize in, and obviously those funded engagements again on the right-hand side. So if anything on screen is of interest, feel free to take a screenshot and reach out to us, and we'll be happy to accommodate. So with that said, thank you for your time today. I hope the session's been insightful. We will be running future sessions around all of the Microsoft technologies as the year goes on, and we'll be doing deep dives into all of them. And part of the agenda will be to uh, target the licensing challenges specific to each individual product. So today's been an overview, but we will be getting into the weeds with all of the different Microsoft technologies.